Glad you're here and let's get started. All right, so my slides are up and here we go. So the fiscal year 25 aggregate report preview. As a reminder, the fiscal year that we're describing in this spans July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. And we're going to be looking at a ton of data that all of you helped to put into the COVE system. So before sharing any of the data, let's talk about what's included. So for this, in the last fiscal year, the median survey duration was 4 minutes and 16 seconds. That's how long it took visitors to complete all of our surveys across all of the participating sites. Um, and for everyone who's been using the monthly tracking logs regularly, where we could look at response rates and data collection hours, you can see that we had roughly 48% median monthly response rate. So really close to 1 out of every 2 visiting groups is saying yes to our survey. We know that's not true at all sites. We know that's not true at all days. So take that with a grain of salt. And it took roughly an hour to collect about 2 surveys. It would say on average, but you can see here that that's the median. So just under 2 surveys per hour on the median across all sites. Remember, a few months ago, we talked about the importance of high quality data coming into the COVE system, particularly when sharing our aggregate data, not just back with you, but with the field of institutions at large. We require a minimum sample size of at least 100 surveys, no matter what your annual target is. And we require that fewer than 1/3 of all collected surveys come from the QR code to maintain the standardized data collection methodology that COVES has trained all of you on. After going through that eligibility cleaning process across all of our sites, the usable sample for this fiscal year aggregate report was 84 institutions submitting data and totaling 41,381 surveys. So that is a ton. This is our largest amount of data to date, and we're frankly overwhelmed at times by how much is in there, but excited to share it back with you and everyone else. As a reminder about those criteria for being eligible to be included in the report, we do apply statistical weighting to make sure that we don't unduly influence the sample from particularly large organizations that collect more data or more surveys than others. And we also want to make sure that we don't have any particular outliers that really influence, whether that's at the individual or the institutional level. Right here, you can see the formula that we apply to those survey data to ensure that we get the minimum bias or the minimum undue influence possible. And here I explain a little bit more detail about each of these components. But I know this is overkill. Really quickly, the weight that goes into all of this tries to say that if you're a huge museum or you collected a huge amount of data, we're going to shrink that sample size to ensure that you don't influence everybody else. But also, if you're a really small museum and you did a really good job collecting data, that data is going to be preserved as best as possible. So, as an example, if you are a medium organization and you hit your target and you participated all 12 months, your weight would be 1, right? Every survey would be accurately reflected just as it is. To demonstrate how we minimize the undue influence from particularly large samples, you can see the institutional sample sizes here. So we're not going to go into detail, but the blue bars are the unweighted samples and the orange bars are the weighted samples. So at the tail end on the left, you can see that there's very little change between the blue and the orange. And at the far right, with the largest organizations, the largest survey samples, you can see that those drop considerably to make sure that there's not too much pull from the bigger museums that are participating. I'm happy to go into way more detail, but not on this call. So if you have questions about weighting, sample sizes, QR codes, eligibility, anything like that, let's chat offline, or I should say, let's chat online, but not on this call. Okay, let's keep going. So I didn't put the table of contents up front for this report teaser, but as you all are very familiar with the COVES survey itself, remember that we measure who visits, why they come, what they see and do, and how they feel about their experiences. 3 of those 4 things can be standardized or aggregated across all of our sites, and that is who visits, why do they come, and how do they feel about their experience. The what did they see or do, as you all know, is very specific to each museum. And so we're not going to cover that in this year's aggregate report. We continue to explore options for how to look across sites as far as the experiences, but we need to do way more thinking and need a lot more thought from you as well in order to do that. So let's start with who visits. What comes next is the aggregate, meaning this is not subgroup analysis, this is not science versus art, this is not any kind of any other lens other than everybody all in together. So what you see here, and I'm going to try and go slow so you can look at the slides and make some observations yourself and see if there are any questions. But this first slide is group demographics. So these are the questions about the visiting group that is not specific to the survey taker, right? Not the respondent, but the everybody. How many other adults, how many kids are in your group? Collectively, where do you live in relation to the museum? Does anyone in your group, you or anyone else, have a permanent or temporary disability? All those things. So you can see here that the average group size is just under 3 when you count the adults and the children together. The majority of group members are local only, right? Just around 50%, not quite. We have 11% of groups who identify as having a permanent or temporary disability, and another 7% that prefer not to say. And the largest composition of groups can include 2 adults and 0 children. Although we know that, as you can see on the left side with the average group size, that's going to fluctuate a lot. And we know that that's going to fluctuate depending on the type of museum and the size of museum too. So that is the first pass at group demographics. Again, I'm trying to talk a little bit more and go a little bit slower so that everyone can digest. And I'm happy to go back to slides 2 once I go through the presentation if we want to focus on specific graphs or individual data points. So feel free to flag those in the chat. So continuing on with group demographics, you can see here the ages and genders self-identified of all of the group members, not just the survey respondent. We have a pretty even distribution of the adult ages, and a little bit of a normal curve as far as the children ages, where we have fewer 0 to 3-year-olds and fewer 13 to 17-year-olds, but the majority of 4 to 12-year-olds. What I find most interesting about this page is that for the children's reported gender, we have basically a 50-50 split, right? It's very close to even. On the adult side, that's not true, right? We've got more than 50% of group members who are women and fewer than 40% who are men. So this is interesting to compare adult and children and opens up a whole lot of questions about group composition that we can explore at the institutional level. After group demographics, we jump into individual demographics. And again, I should have flagged this probably 3 slides ago. We talked about the bulk of the data, 41,000, more than 41,000 survey responses going into this. And then after applying the weighting, the total sample actually gets down to 25,000. So you can see in the membership sample size right there, each one of these graphs has a sample size affiliated with it. It's not a fixed number because, again, people can skip questions. Not all questions are asked to all survey takers, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why we list the sample size for every single one of these graphs as best we can. The bulk of our visitors are non-members. And again, this is going to fluctuate a lot, but on the aggregate, 15% of all the survey responses came in from members, but 85% were non-members. When it comes to the highest education level, you can see here that the majority of our respondents either have a college degree or a graduate degree. So, in total, that's 75% of our sample has at least a college degree. The household income you can see on the right-hand side there, the thing I always point out. So this is aligned with census categories, and we'll go into that towards the tail end of this presentation. But you can see that more than a quarter of our respondents select not to provide this information back to us. We know that household income can be a very personal data point, if nothing else, but a very personal matter. We continue to ask this because we can find a lot of value of aligning household income with different demographic aspects that allow us to better understand who is visiting or who is not visiting. So we continue to ask this, even though we know that a quarter of our respondents would rather not give us this information. And we try to interpret it best we can, knowing that only 74% of our surveys have this data. Continuing on with individual demographics, we get into race and ethnicity, self-identified, residence. So if the survey taker has a US zip code, we're able to make sense of that. And then if they don't, if they're from another country, they're able to select the country of origin. And then we ask about LGBTQ plus identity. And you can see the different percentages for all three of those questions here. Again, the majority of our visitors identify as white alone. So that graph on the left, even though the question allows visitors to select multiple categories, we have recoded this so that multiple races is 10% at the bottom. Another 12% prefer not to give this information. And you can see the rest of the distribution in that graph. The majority of our visitors do identify as coming from the United States. We do recognize that there is the potential for a language bias because the COVES survey is only translated into Spanish at this point, and data collection methods, limit us communicating in a variety of languages that the survey is available. But again, the language itself might be a barrier for many. So this is likely underreporting the international visitors that we actually attract. With respect to LGBTQ+, there's one important thing I'd like to say, no matter what you look at the data, this is the first full fiscal year of data that we have that includes Q for queer. So we do specify that in parentheses when we ask the visiting groups. We know that Q can mean questioning. We know that the plus means that there are lots of other identities that fall into this LGBTQ plus umbrella. And we want people to select this if they feel like they are part of that community. But again, this is a self-identity selected response, so people can, again, prefer not to say to this question. So those are the group and individual demographics. And I am going to continue on with motivations. So why do people visit? So hopefully most of you are familiar with all of the technical details of the COVES survey, but in case you're new or you're about to get collected or about to get started with data collection, or maybe you just haven't been on the floors in a while and you're just interpreting the data, remember that visitors are allowed to select up to 2 responses for why they chose to come to the museum today or during your visit. And here we see the art motivations broken out on the right and the science motivations top 6 categories on the left. This is the one area of our core survey where art and science diverge slightly. The response options themselves are different between the art cohort and the science plus cohort. So that's why we've selected the top 6. On the art side, all 12 response options consolidate into one of these 6 categories. So there's 2 response options per category. And you can see the distributions here. Now, the primary finding here is that across all museums, art, science, children's, natural history, history, you name it, right? Wherever you are in the COVES world, the number one motivator for visitors is to come for a social experience, to spend time together as a group or family, or for some aspect of social enjoyment. So people are coming as a group, as a social experience. And then once they pass that social aspect, they're really interested in thinking about other group members, which includes learning and fun, right? So learning and pursuing interests for the art cohort, fun or entertainment or educational experience for group members in the science cohort. And then depending on the response options, because of the different lists for both art and science, you can see that something to do while visiting the area or the popularity of the site is another top motivator. So while I'm in a city that either I don't live in or maybe I don't go to very often, even if it's close by, there's a popularity or recommendation aspect that often floats to the top. So you can see these percentages for all motivation for art and science here. Now, towards the bottom of the slide, you can see the call out. 44% of visitors only select one motivation category, which means that even though we allow visitors to select up to 2, say they wanted to come for fun and for a social experience, 44% across cohorts only select one. when looking at the distribution of these responses for the folks who only select one, the order does not change. It is still for these top driver reasons. The percentages change because you're looking at a different subsample of responses, but the order doesn't change. So people are still primarily driven for a social reason. I saw something come through in the chat. I'm not sure if that's directed at me, Sarah. I'm hoping. Okay, great. You're gonna call it out if it does.
Yeah, I was just as you looked at membership, as we looked at household income, LGBT, LGBTQ plus identification, I just went and pulled fiscal 19, looked at a previous report to compare,
Okay,
and there are some interesting differences. So I put the
cool.
link.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of patterns of visitation, was that said or was that I'm looking at it maybe, so I was thinking about the next slide. Maybe no one said patterns of visitation, but here we are, and we're now analyzing the frequency or the duration for all of the visits across our museums. So the patterns of visitation that we're focused on here exclusively are the number of visits in the last year, if the visitors have come in the last 12 months, the date of their last visit. So that kind of implies, anything less than 12 months that they've come multiple times, but they certainly could have come before then. And then, of course, the amount of time they spend in our museums. So let's start with the frequency of visitation. 43%, in the bottom left-hand corner, 43% of all visitors have come for the first time. That's who we're capturing in our sample. 43% of all of the surveys indicate that this is their first time at that specific museum, wherever you are. The distribution within that changes a little bit more. You can see that there's 30% who have come in the last year. That's the combination of less than 3 months, 3 to 6, and 6 to 12. And then an additional 9% have come in 1 to 2 years. That's what we're categorizing as recent visitors. Anyone who has come in the last 2 years is being considered recent, but 43% are first-time visitors. Thinking about that 30% of folks who have come in the last 12 months, though, the number of visits in the last year prior to this one, right? So this is the first visit. So 2/3 of the sample, this is their first visit in the last 12 months. And the response options here have changed as well, because if you've been a part of the COVES cohort for a while, you'll remember that we actually changed this question as well. It used to ask something slightly confusing, including this visit, how many times in the past 12 months have you come? So the minimum answer in theory should have been two. But now we've simplified it to just say prior to this visit, how many times have you come in the last 12 months? And they don't have a write-in response, right? They get to tell us this is, I've come one other time, I've come 2 to 6 times, I've come 7 or more times. So that's why the breakout looks a little bit different. But again, you can see here that 67% acknowledge this is their first visit in the last 12 months. When it comes to stay time, the bulk of our visitors, right, looks like almost 80%, are staying less than 3 hours. Now, we know that this is going to be highly contingent on the size of the site, the size of your museum, the amount of stuff there is to see. When we look at all sites together across our smallest and our largest, the median stay time at every museum, I should say, the median stay time is 1 hour and 43 minutes, with roughly 40% saying they stay in that 1 to 2 hour range. Very few visitors are staying 4, 5, 6 hours, and not quite 25%, but more than a fifth of visitors are staying less than an hour. So there's a lot of quick hit visitors who are coming to our sites. All right, that's the patterns of visitation. We're on to how they feel. Now, these are some of the top level ratings items that we ask. So you will see here the overall experience rating. Remember that this asks about the quality of today's museum experience based on a scale going from poor to fair to good to excellent to outstanding. With again, the theory that if people are selecting outstanding, any scale point above excellent, we've done something to surpass their expectations during that visit. We have an extraordinary percentage of excellent and outstanding. 90% of all visitors say their visit was excellent or outstanding, with almost 50% saying it was outstanding. So this question is important to think about, because if we only asked if it was poor, fair, good, or excellent, we might be limiting ourselves on how we're conceiving surpassing people's expectations or really exceeding people's notions of the visit. You can see at the bottom the OER percent outstanding range. That is each institution's percent outstanding, so that top category. And it ranges from as low as 27% to as high as 70%, just under 70%. So there is a huge range of percent outstanding that contribute to this 49% in aggregate. Now, you can see the N there actually says 84 institutions. So remember, that's a lot of information, but the bulk is spread right around that 49%. In the top right, you can see that the science cohort and the art cohort have slightly different percent outstandings, but both of them are exceptionally high, which is phenomenal. In fact, this is the highest that I think we've seen it ever. And Sarah might be able to fact check that with citing some of our previous aggregate reports, but from what I've looked at, it is exceptionally high right now. So that's overall experience rating. And then, of course, we have the Net Promoter Score. This is how likely are you to recommend to a friend or colleague, insert the name of the museum, right? So this is a recommendation engine based on the Harvard Business School publication with the theory that if people are exceptionally high on the 0 to 10 scale, nines and tens, they're your promoters. They're the people who are going to go out of their way to talk about your organization or their experience there because they love you and there's some kind of it's more than a relationship, it's loyalty, right? The idea there is that nines and tens promoters are loyal to your organization. Sevens and eights on the scale from 0 to 10 are passive. They like you, right? They're not going to say anything negative, but they're probably not going to go out of their way to say anything positive either. And then six and below are detractors. Something about their relationship with your museum, whether it was that experience or everything about it, leads them to say, I wouldn't actually go back. I wouldn't tell my friends to go. So they're likely to detract when thinking about recommending your organization or your museum experience to others. Thankfully, we don't have too many detractors in this equation. So the way the NPS is calculated is the proportion, right? The percentage of promoters subtracting the percentage of detractors and omitting the passives altogether. So in this little chart in the top left, the green is the percentage of promoters, the yellow is the percentage of detractors, and the net score by subtracting detractors from promoters is 74.5. Again, very, very high. For those of you who are either new to Net Promoter Score, new to COVES, 74.5 is very high. I think last year it was 71. If you think about your internet service provider or maybe your TV provider or anybody who kind of does tech services, their net promoter scores are often below 0. They have more detractors than they have promoters. So when we look at the industry or many industries in comparison, this museum net promoter score is exceptionally high and important to keep an eye on when you think about how people are talking about your organization once they leave the building. Similar to the way the OER slide was broken out, you can see the institutional net promoter scores on the bottom on that range. The net promoter score does have plausible values from negative 100 to positive 100. In this sample, we see net promoter scores of just over 40 to just under 90. So again, a huge spread with the bulk of those being in the high 60s and mid 70s up to 80. Science and art distinguish themselves just a little bit with the net promoter score. Science plus cohort net promoter score is 73.1 and the art cohort is 75.2. Now, for the first time in the fiscal year reports, we did a little bit of a comparison between the two. We often get asked, why are we asked both? What's the difference between the questions? How do I make sense of the two? And here is the complicated look, but I'm going to break it down for you. So this is the proportion of all respondents who give us answers for NPS and OER. In a perfect world, there would be some kind of pattern along the diagonal. In this case, I would say anything less than excellent is a detractor, excellent is passive, and outstanding is promoter. But I've already kind of debunked that by thinking that outstanding is actually surpassing expectations. So excellent is still really excellent, right? So how does this shake out? Why are these two questions different? Well, you can see that most people, almost half of respondents, are outstanding and promoters. That's good, right? That means the quality of the museum experience was good and the likelihood to recommend is good, but that's also really high. So how can we make sense of it? Well, we make sense of it by looking at the surrounding cells, and in particular, who is having a great time, right? The quality of their experience was excellent or outstanding, but they're not promoting your organization. Why is that? Here are some quotes from folks who are detractors, even though they said the experience today was excellent or outstanding. Most of my friends and relatives live out of the area and are working. It's pretty, I'm just not from here. My friends aren't into art. Would recommend it only if someone asked me about the museum. And I'm going to get to the last quote in a second. But you can see here that the idea is that when we ask about recommending to a friend or colleague, if they're not local, if their friends and colleagues are somewhere else, they're unlikely to recommend you. If you offer a specific topic, subject matter that they're into, but their friends and colleagues aren't, they're unlikely to recommend you. It's also, this notion here, you get people who will, I don't want to say game the system, but they understand the rating. I had a great time, good staff. Overall, my visit is an 8 because my wife won't let me like anything more than her. This is kind of a joke response, but it actually speaks a lot to the cognitive patterns of responses that visitors are likely to give. They're thinking about the difference between a 7 and a 9 or a 10 and an 8. And if you're familiar with the Net Promoter Scale, you might be as well. You might be thinking about, am I a promoter? Am I passive? Am I a detractor? Because I know how this formula works. We can see here that visitors are doing the same thing. Even when they have an excellent or outstanding visit, why they might be less likely to recommend you. The same thing is true in the reverse pattern. Who is likely to promote you outside the building, but maybe didn't have the excellent or outstanding experience that you were hoping for. So even though this is only 2% of visitors cumulatively, maybe there were specific instances during that visit that prevented them from having a truly excellent or outstanding time. Couldn't figure out how to use the locks for the storage spaces. The temperature of the gallery, it gets a bit stuffy and crowded. I wish, in parentheses, I wish there had been notification about the construction. More seating in the rooms, definitely better parking, right? So you can see that there are all these specific aspects of the experience that are leading people to say, today you didn't meet or exceed my expectations. In fact, you left something to be desired, but I still have loyalty to this organization. Maybe these are all members. I actually didn't check these quotes if they were from members or not, but maybe there's another reason. They're hyper local, they come all the time, but today you didn't knock their socks off. So, this is an area where we can find specific things to focus on for improving overall experience rating, not just for these visitors, but for everyone. So, pay attention to these cells. When you think about how you can use Net Promoter Score and overall experience rating, here is one concrete example of ways you can actually improve the experience. Beyond OER and NPS, we get into the experience ratings. So these are similarly measured on a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 is not at all and 10 is absolutely. And we ask questions about staff member helpfulness, restroom cleanliness, the value of the experience compared to the cost of the experience, educational experience, gift shop experience, entertainment experience, exhibits in working order, if you ask that, and cafe and restaurant, if you have those. And here you can see again that we do exceptionally well, problematically well, I would say, because most people are up in the 8, 9, 10 area. If you were to take the medians instead of the means, these are all mean experience ratings, averages, the medians would all be 10s or 9s when you get down to cafe and restaurant experience. Hard to distinguish one from another. Now, so here the sample size says n varies, but you remember our aggregate sample size is well above 20,000. Even minute differences here mean there are meaningful gaps between these measures. Staff member helpfulness and restroom cleanliness are clearly above value for cost and everything below. And the cafe and restaurant experience, which is historically at the bottom of this chart, is always an area for improvement. So even though we rate highly, these differences are meaningful. And again, it's good that we are doing well across all of these measures for our visitors, but finding ways to put them into practice is going to take a little bit of work because again, we're doing so well. So keep in mind for this aggregate report that even though all the numbers are almost 9 and above, those differences say something about at least the order of these ratings. Okay, I've been going sort of fast, but I've actually been talking for half an hour, so I promise I'm getting to the end. And this is only about half of the report because we're still working on the rest. But I wanted to let you all know that one of the things we're doing this year, unlike the deep dives that we've done in years past, is we're actually committing to including visitor subgroup information for each one of these areas: who visits, why they visit, patterns of visitation, and experience ratings. And so the four that are most important across all aspects of our analyses continue to be group composition, specific to groups that only have adults and groups that bring kids, anyone under the age of 18. People who are loyal, aka members and non-members. People who, as we showed on that visit history graph, are first-time visitors against recent visitors, anyone who's come in the last 2 years. And then for non-members only, because we know that membership is its own lens of analysis, for non-members only, who is local but not a member, and who is exclusively out of town and not a member. So that category excludes anyone who has a membership and excludes anyone who comes from a mixed group that's a little bit local and a little bit out of town. So that is non-members, locals, and out of town only. And again, the visit history only includes first-time visitors and anyone who visited in less than 2 years. If they came 2 to 5 years ago, 5 to 10 years ago, couldn't remember, they're also excluded from this lens just because they're not a first-time visitor or a recent visitor. So in all of those dimensions that we looked at, even though I'm not going to share the data, you will see information that distinguishes how adults and groups with kids, adult-only groups and groups with kids, differ in some of those ways. Their average survey duration, their average stay time, some of the demographic characteristics and things like that. The final couple of pages of this year's report are going to focus on the Science Plus versus Art comparisons. So I focused a lot on the aggregate data, but we know that the institution can actually influence some of the characteristics of the groups. The most obvious example, which will of course be in this report, is the difference in proportion of adult-only visitors, right? Art museums tend to have a ton of adult-only visitors, 80+%, and that's very rare in Science Plus museums. And that, as we just saw in the exploring visitor subgroups thing, can also influence a number of other aspects of the visit. So we're going to explore things like that. And then the final page is dedicated to how we, as a museum cohort, right, the COVES cohort at the biggest level, compare to known census data. So 5 areas: race and ethnicity, household income, education, LGBTQ plus identity, and disability. We look at the science and the art cohorts compared to census data to show where we are meeting our community, right, our national community, and where we might be falling short. The data has changed slightly since FY24, but not in meaningful ways that would change the narrative around who we are serving and who we are not. And with that said, I'm going to wind it down for comments,
Uh, yeah,
questions.
question about this, just to make sure
Yeah,
I didn't quite track that. So we're looking at the entire national census, not based on the 84 locations where we are.
correct.
Okay, great. And a question just came in of when will this be published?
Oh, that's a great question. So our print target, no, our drop dead like physical things in hand is September 5th. So if it's not online at the end of that first week of September, it should be online the end of the next week of September, depending on our conference craziness, which is a lot and always and often. We probably won't post it before we go, and because we're going to have a booth at this conference where we'll be handing out the report. It might not go online until the following week. So you can expect it online by Friday the 12th at the latest. Karen, I see your question about being a museum that has multiple disciplines. Yes, we have a bunch of museums that are multiple disciplines. I don't want to name them all, but there's a number that kind of defy clean categorization. Of course, each museum gets to select which version of the survey, Science Plus or Art, they factor into. And again, the only measurement difference right now, besides site-specific measures or questions, is the motivation question. And even that has like 50% overlap. In our heart of hearts, in the future, we would love to have a large enough aggregate museum group that we could actually break out by primary museum discipline, right? So, like looking at natural history museums and children's museums and science centers and art museums of different kinds, university affiliated. People have talked about, free museums versus paid museums. There's lots of different ways that we want to do that, but we need to grow our continuing to expand COVES group but also make sure we have robust enough numbers within each of those categories in order to do fair and accurate comparisons. Megan, I see you're off mute, I think. Did you have a question? You want to jump in?
I am so sorry. I didn't realize I was off mute.
Oh, no,
I do not have a question.
oh, great.
Hello?
Well, it's great to see your face. No worries. No
Yeah.
question necessary.
Um,
Um,
Karen just posed a question of why the difference in motivations between science and art.
yeah, that's a great question. For a number of reasons, which continue to be probed by our questions and measures team. So, the simplest answer is we started with one version of the question when COVES was developed and was for science centers only. It came from some historical artifact, meaning an instrument walkthrough and conversations with the founding groups in categories that have been relied on in the past, and slowly evolved as coves evolved. And then when we had an IMLS grant to think about including art museums and expanding coves intentionally to other types of disciplines, we had a working group that was focused on all of the instrumentation. And we decided collectively that the motivation question was the one where there were the biggest differences. I can colloquially give an example that relaxation and recuperation tends to be a primary driver for visiting an art museum, but is for sure not in the top 10 for children's and science centers a lot, right? Like it's just not often a transcendental, like, ah, I feel relaxed after that visit. Yeah, Karen, come off mute.
Just a little more specifically, I was super curious about the difference in the wording of the social enjoyment question
And,
because
and
again, I don't know, did people do open-ended asking? Is that what led to it? It was the wording of that one. I totally having
yeah,
gone through
and
this, yeah.
And that's probably the deficit of trying to share this in a short form report that is more graphic than words. But the truth behind that graph is social enjoyment is the parent category for two response options on the art side, one of which includes the exact language that you saw at the top of the Science Center graph, which was to spend time with my group or family or whatever that was. So the response option on the science and art is exactly the same. It's the parent category and the way we combine the data on the art side based on the theoretical framework we use to create that question. So again, this continues to be an area for questions and measures as we think about bringing these two things together or why they are different and how important it is that we have historical accuracy, right, longitudinal data. But it's a great question and one that we continue to look into. But despite those differences, I'm happy, but also amazed that we have that pattern between the two, right? It's like it's social. That's why people come to museums. Doesn't matter what kind of museum it is. Um, yeah. Other thoughts, comments, questions?
Yeah, I had one question.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated the OER NPS chart, and you sort of suggested to folks to look into that and explore that. And I'm wondering if that table is a part of the dashboard, the Qualtrics dashboard, or if that is something that sites need to do separately.
It is not part of the dashboard. I know that for a fact.
Okay.
I don't know how easy or hard it would be to put it on the dashboard. So that is a separate question that we can investigate. And of course, doing the comparison is not, well, I can support people who are interested in doing that with their own raw data if the dashboard
Oh,
is not capable of handling that. So please reach out if that's something you're interested in exploring and need some help with.
awesome. Thanks. Other questions or thoughts from folks?
Yeah, Jenny, you can reach out to Coves and Coves, so the Coves at MOS.org email address and the Coves support at Crystal Bridges email address. Both of those groups you should reach out to, and we'll figure out the best way to handle supporting you in unpacking your data for your director, CFO, etc.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are you going to put their names in the chat or
Oh,
how do I get their emails?
yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
I don't know the Crystal Bridges one. I don't know if Rachel or others can type that in, or Ryan, if you know it off the top of your head.
I'm adding it in the chat.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. Yes, Brooke, I was also surprised by how
Uh-huh.
high the aggregate OER was. And again, right, it's wonderful and a little problematic, right? At what point do we begin to have measurement problems where we can't, the measures themselves become less sensitive to distinguishing excellent, outstanding, or below excellent, or above outstanding? Like where do we need to continue to push our understanding of how to capture the quality of the experience? But yeah, 50% outstanding is high.
There's also something interesting. I know I put it in the link in the chat earlier, but I think the numbers are up from fiscal year 2019. And so in our bounce back post COVID and whatever this time is now that we want to call it, like people are having a different kind of experience with us. So there's
Yeah,
something
and
interesting there.
And I mean, again, at the aggregate level, that's absolutely true, right? And Brooke, you're right. We might need to replicate the original OER article, which, by the way, we are going to cite in our report to make sure people know where that measure came from, or like some of the
Mm.
research that's been done previously. But this is all the more reason why studying subgroups of visitors is really important. Now, we picked four that we know at the big level impact the visitors, the visit experience, many of the characteristics that we've been investigating, right? So that's the membership, locals and non-locals, groups of kids, et cetera. But you should do that too. As you think about your own data, if you're looking at OER, that's great that maybe your outstanding percentage is 49%, close to the aggregate. But is that true for all groups? Is that true for all of the people that you think you're serving? All of the marketing that you're doing, right? Like, how can you take that with the rest of the information from COVES and make better use of it to say, like, wow, yes, our percent outstanding is 49%, but for this group over here, it's actually only 20%. And maybe that tells us that we need to do something specific with those people, or to better understand that experience and why it's not the same as everyone else. So, yeah. Has the range of outstanding ratings changed? Yeah. So Brooke is kind of unpacking that there. Um, but keep in mind that the percent excellent and percent outstanding together was 90%. 90%. I want to make like a crude joke, like we all need to do worse at offering the visitor experience so we can change that. But obviously that's not what I mean, right? It's a measurement problem, not an experience problem.
I have a question. It might be a little bit of a rabbit hole or a tangent. But has has the Coves team ever thought about or already looked at Coves data next to or kind of alongside the um, ongoing museum visitors study that
Mm.
AAM does
We have
with the
not.
Wilkinson group?
Through the Wilkening group, yeah. Wilkening.
Yeah,
No,
Wilkening.
but we
Because
did connect with Susie Wilkening not too long ago and had the idea that we should do some kind of not comparative analytics, but trying to see how the Wilkening study and Coves complement each other, right? We don't consider Susie or that group competitors. I
yeah,
think
no.
we pulled a list of like 6 or 7 museums currently participating that do both. And so how can we leverage some of that information to kind of unpack it and understand it differently? So no, we haven't done it.
Mm.
Great suggestion. Let's look into that, Megan. Yeah, Karen.
I just want to say that you have to be really clear that the Wilkening thing is it's a voluntary response to your email list, which means it's the people who adore you
Yeah.
and who are generally older and have plenty of time. So, I mean, I think we found it interesting, but it's not actually getting at your visitors. It's getting at the people who are on your mailing lists. And so I think it's going to be really, I'm excited to see some analysis, but I feel like they're qualitatively for two different reasons. And honestly, the Wilkening study isn't that helpful if you're trying to get all your first time visitors into the door.
I love that ringing endorsement of the COVES methodology. One of the things that we often differentiate when we talk about COVES in relation to these other projects, including the Mori Group, including, there's a number of them that try and do these visitor experience studies, but the methodology is always email. It's always social media capture. It's always like your member list. And so that is why we took the time and effort to do the pilot study through IMLS. And we doubled down on this during the pandemic, and we doubled down on this with the QR code, right? Like we know what makes our data more trustworthy when trying to draw inferences about the larger museum visitation that we're serving. But we all also recognize that there are opportunities for looking at other data sources and making some sense of it. So thank you, Karen, for that. And also thank you, Megan, for the suggestion, because I still think there's going to be something that we can learn from partnering or analyzing data together. So it's always a good suggestion. And I'm actually hopeful. I don't want to promise this. I should stop. I'm going to stop recording and then we can just chat for the last few minutes. Great. I'm going to stop recording.
Lisa, please, or Liza, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Hi.